The best time to scout is, to me, right now in January. And I neglected to put this on, I normally do on my January deer hunting chores, because it is a really important time to get out in the woods and notice what's going on. I don't like summertime. And a lot of people will look at during summertime, well, we jumped a big buck from this knoll over here. Well, where he's bedding in the summertime has really most of the time, not always, but most of the time, nothing to do with where he's bedding in the fall. So it's interesting. A lot of people start to ramp up their scouting efforts. You know, we're watching deer during the summertime. We're really getting out in July, August, September. Even our views on YouTube and social media, everything really start to ramp up to where it bottoms out May, June, and then all of a sudden in the hunting industry numbers, it just shoots through the roof going into middle to end of November, and then back down again in December, January, February, March. Bottoms out and then goes back up again. That's the cycle. And so much attention is placed at the wrong time of the year, and especially when it comes to scouting. So you go scouting in March, April. Well, deer are herded up. There's ever shrinking food sources and locations of good quality cover that offers winter thermal protection, but more importantly, winter browse. You know, back in the day, deer used to migrate all the way from the Lake Superior shoreline all the way to the southern portion of the UP in Michigan. And they said that deer would migrate up to 50 miles, probably even more at times, to get to the preferred winter grounds because it was all mature, old growth forest and there's no food. They said when they logged late 1800s, when basically the entire Upper Peninsula was a clear cut, the deer didn't have to migrate. They stayed in one spot and they had so much browse at every turn that more than made up for the lack of thermal protection and snow hindrance protection that conifers would offer, or traditional deer yard areas, or areas that had less snow, because they had so much energy and food at every turn. They didn't starve. Food's everywhere. It's plentiful. And when you have high stem count, that actually helps provide thermal protection too. So a lot of people think we have to have this great winter cover. But let's face it, there's not a lot of areas of really good winter cover. It's that browse that's so critical. And a lot of areas just don't have that young regeneration, shrub and briar tips, more of that upland area. If there's a lot of rabbits that live there, that's probably decent deer habitat. And that would apply for fall and winter. But you have to ask yourself, and that's a really important question down here, number 5, is this reflective of fall or winter? And when you get into March and April, February, you're looking at more winter cover. And that's why I don't mention anything about shed antlers here. Shed antlers will tell you that a buck's alive, but it really doesn't have a lot to do, typically the majority of the time, with where he's at in the fall in any way. So you can put on hundreds of miles walking through shed season if you want, and you find all this great collection of antlers, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're any step further or any mile closer to fill in your tag on one of those target bucks in the fall, other than you know he's there. Could tell you this is where he's at during February and March when he dropped his antlers. That's not where he's going to be in the fall. So that could be a little bit of input that you have, or a little insight into his pattern. Before you ever head to the woods at this time of year, again, this time of year, signs fresh. You can see what happened in the fall the best. But before you ever head out, really look at where you're going, your own property. Look at that depth of cover, meaning does and fawns bed here, young bucks, old bucks. Decide if you're going on public land, where parking areas are, campground areas. Look where you think, and based on all the concepts that we teach on this channel, where mature bucks should be in the first place, and then head out to the woods and scout those areas only. Really narrow it down, because if you have a large, huge expanse area, 5,000-10,000 acres plus of public land, you're not going to do yourself a very good amount of service by just going out and trying to do a grid pattern search through the entire property. You're going to waste a lot of time. Instead, look and see where deer should be and go out and look. When I get into the woods, I like old sign almost more than fresh sign from the year before. I'd rather see a history where there's, I don't see any sign this year from past season, but boy, I can tell for a decade or more, deer have been using this spot by old rubs, scars on tree, carved out areas. It's really cool when it's fresh sign, but that historical sign is more important because it tells you that a buck will be there in the near future, even if he wasn't there last year. Or if you see fresh sign from the year before, is that buck still even alive? I love seeing old and new sign, number 3 here. So if I can find historical sign and fresh sign from the year before, that could be a money hot spot that you can count on for the following hunting season. Because if that buck is dead, it still shows there's been a history of sign there for many years, and you can count on another buck utilizing that area soon. Now maybe you go out there and people focus sometimes this time of year on sign, sign from the previous year that indicates a small buck, just smaller rubs, maybe an occasional scrape. Mature bucks make a lot more rubs. They make a lot more scrapes. But when you find those high concentrations of small rubs, and you look at it and say, you know what, there was a buck that used this area quite often, and it looks like it was fall because there's a few scrapes here. Must have been October, November. There's a lot of sign here. Looks like small deer, small tracks, small whatever. But you know that buck's going to get older. And if he actually displayed that pattern in October, November, and he made it through the season, he's going to be back. So even if it's small sign, don't get hung up. It's got to be this giant mature buck sign, because the difference from a 2 to 3 year old on public land or a 3 to 4 year old, the amount of sign goes up exponentially as that buck ages. You'll see a lot more the following year. And if you can already tell one was camping out there during October, November, even if it was small, put it in the back of your mind and know that if he's going to be there. Really pay attention to fresh sign, old sign together. And that's why I look at that old and new. I want to see that history of sign. If the new sign, if the fresh sign's there, that's great. But without that old sign, really what's there? And then a lot of times when you're out on your private land and you look at areas and you say, there's always been buck sign here and there's not there. You as a private landowner, you need to ask yourself why. Be critical of yourself. What changes did you make that might have made it that it's not as favorable to a mature buck in this location? Did you add a road system? Did you put a big blind somewhere? Be very critical of yourself to say, analyze it critically. Say, boy, this probably made some major changes, and be very critical, but the old and new sign will really guide you to success. One thing you really look at, I love looking at pellets. So you look at pellets, big and small, indicates a lot of does and fawns. Big, solid pellets, mature bucks. Don't get hung up on if they're clumped together, if they're dry. Deer are what they eat. I would venture a guess if deer ate Mexican food, they'd probably be runny, sticky poop instead of dry pellets. If they're eating a lot of acorns and brush, then you'll have solid pellets. There's a big difference from what they eat to what comes out, and you can just see that. I mean, obviously around here, if they're eating a lot of green, those poop and that pellet and that whole pocket will be a lot more clumped together. It's a lot stickier, and that pellet could really change as it goes throughout the wintertime when they're eating more dry. They're eating shrub tips, hardwood regeneration, briars, acorns, and it gets the picture. But bottom line is big and small. So I'm looking at big pellets, concentrations of big pellets, more singular beds that look all the same size. That'll indicate more mature bucks, especially obviously you're looking at this in the snow. Or when you have big and small beds, big and small pellets, it'll indicate that doe area. So I'll go into areas where even a client will say, yeah, this is where I think a mature buck's bedding. And I look around and it's all a bunch of big pellets, small pellets from the season, from the fall before. And you're seeing currently a bunch of small and big. And yeah, a buck might come through there because during the rut, he knows does and fawns are there and he checks it out on the way through. You have to ask yourself, is he necessarily coming from that location? And finally, when you see this sign, always you ask yourself, is this truly fall sign? And that's where you can get really led astray. The further into the winter you can go, you're looking at the sign in March and April, and you're saying, wow, this looks outstanding. Look at these trails, even some fresh rubs from a late rut. You're looking at a big cedar swamp. And you might not realize deer aren't there not only during the fall, they're not all there during the summer either. So there's vacant of deer for months and months at a time. But when the going gets really rough, they're in there at wintertime and they're taking shelter there. That doesn't mean they're going to be there in the fall when you need to hunt them in October, November. And really start looking at food sources. I've seen some incredible standing cornfields and bean fields on client properties where clients tell me we're just not seeing anything here during the fall. That's why they have us out. but we're seeing litters, just tracks, beds, sign everywhere, but it's reflective of middle of winter. Again, I talk about that client I had down in Mississippi, where Mississippi, it was a southern deer manager that went to the property, and the deer were wintering there in February. He saw 200 deer. So right away he said, you need to shoot 50 deer a year to keep up with us. There's too many deer. Well, that was the winter habitat, and they were coming in for the winter time. It was not reflective of their September, October, November, December numbers. And so those 50 deer they tried to harvest, by year 4 or 5, they were hardly seeing a deer because it was not reflective of fall. And whether you're scouting it, whether you're planning for it on your property, that's why deer census in August, September is useless unless you're talking big enclosures where you have constant deer populations that don't leave that parcel, whether it's an enclosure or a giant public land tract or commercial forestry tract. That's why a lot of deer research is based on big science. And so they might tell you to take a deer census in August, September, put some corn pellets out, use these numbers, they'll tell you how many deer, and that's just a pivot point. Because the best properties have deer in the fall, they're increasing into the fall. Typically, most of the best properties don't have a lot of deer during the summertime. They could, there's always exceptions. The bottom line is the property should be getting better in October, November, and that should be the sign you're scouting in the wintertime, what you're trying to manage all season long. And that's, if you're going out on a scouting mission, do it right now in January. It's a great time to do so. Always ask yourself, is it fall sign? Is it really fall sign? And then before you even head out to the woods, have a game plan and look for that historical sign that'll guide you to success. And if there's new sign, great. Don't worry about if it's small or big. And head into this coming hunting season. And the time flies. It'll be here before we know it. But head into this hunting season with a lot of confidence on your side because you scouted just after the season ended. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. You're our best followers. You followed all the way to the end of the video. Really invite you to check out our website. We have our earthway spreaders for sale. Great Christmas presents. We're booking clients right now, all 5 of us. So by the end of December, it seems early, but by the end of December, our schedule will be booked for 2025. It's hard to believe. I'm already booked for December and most of January, February. We have our web classes, the rut web class, how to design your whitetail property, and really important, hunting hills and thermals, understanding the wind. Those are great products on our site, all the books. Thank you so much for watching all the videos, buying the seed that you did this year. Really appreciate you.